"You're useless now. Find somewhere else to die." Those words cut deeper than any blade, shattering a lifetime of love and loyalty in a single breath. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It often comes from the ones you trust most. And when it does, it doesn't just break your heart, it tests your very will to stand tall. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The house I live in has stood against the salty wind and heavy snow of Portland, Maine, for nearly 70 years, and so have I. Its clapboard siding, once painted a proud sea green, has faded to a weathered gray that matches the sky most days. From my front window, I can see the mouth of the bay, buoys rocking like restless children, and the distant sound of gulls cutting through the morning quiet. On the walls hang photographs from another life, collapsed power poles after a storm, my crew stringing new wire under a bitter December sky, and black and white shots of the lineman camps, where we drank bad coffee and told worse jokes. Each frame is a reminder of the years I spent clinging to poles and gale winds, fighting to keep the lights on when the whole town thought the world was ending. I worked 40 years as a lineman. My body is scarred by it, my hands thick with calluses that will never fade, but I wouldn't trade those years for anything. I remember the crackle of ice on the lines, the way the wires sang when the nor'easter tore through. I remember the silence after a storm when every house sat in darkness, and the relief in people's faces when the lights flickered back to life. That was my calling. Dangerous, exhausting, but honorable. These days, folks don't look at men like me the same way. To them, we're relics, stubborn old workers with no place in the sleek new world of glass towers and digital accounts. Still, I know what I kept alive through all those storms, and no investment banker will ever convince me it didn't matter. My wife, Ellen, died 10 years ago. She left me with memories that sit heavier than any ladder I ever carried. Since then, the house has been quiet, save for the clock ticking in the kitchen and the moan of the sea at night. My daughter, Emily, tries to fill the silence when she visits. She's 36 now, with a good career in real estate and 2 children of her own. Every Sunday, she stops by with coffee, setting it on the table, just the way her mother used to. Those small gestures mean more to me than she realizes, but I can feel her torn loyalty. She is caught between being my daughter and being her husband's wife. Grant Whitaker, my son-in-law, is a different breed of man. At 38, he talks like every dinner is a presentation to potential investors. He has the smile of someone who's never doubted a deal would close, and the polish of a man who knows money can open any door. Recently, he closed a massive transaction that netted him $30 million. The whole town is buzzing about it. Grant Whitaker, the man who will put Portland on the map. At the diner, at church, even at the hardware store, people whisper his name like he's some kind of savior. To me, he's just another man who thinks numbers on a screen make him untouchable. What they don't talk about is Reed Boatyard, the land my father worked and passed down. It sits right next to my home, old docks stretching into the bay, sheds filled with the smell of pine and tar. Years ago, when the boatyard was folded into a company, I kept a sliver of ownership, Class B founder units they call them now. They don't mean much in profit, but they hold a power most forget. Veto rights over big changes, the kind that decide whether a working harbor stays alive or turns into luxury condos. That clause is my anchor, the one piece of ground I still command. And then there's the storm clamp. Evan, my best friend from the trade, and I designed it years back. A simple device that secured lines during heavy wind, saving hours of repair and untold lives in freezing storms. He died before we could see it widely used. The patent papers, original sketches, and notations lie in a wooden chest in my living room, the kind of chest sailors once carried. It is heavy with more than documents. It is heavy with the proof that my work mattered beyond the paychecks. Emily, bless her, still comes on Sundays, still pours the coffee, and asks if I need anything. but I see how her eyes follow Grant, how his talk about opportunities and redevelopment weighs on her. She stands between us, not wanting to choose, yet the choice hovers in the air every time he mentions unlocking the harbor's true potential. She tells me I worry too much, but I know the look of storms on the horizon, and one is forming right inside my own family. On my kitchen table lies a glossy brochure, Harbor Crown Residences, live between history and luxury. Next to it, folded and smudged, is the weather forecast calling for another nor'easter. Two visions of the future stare back at me, steel and glass towers for outsiders, or the old resilience of a harbor town. My fingers linger on the forecast. I've seen enough storms to know when trouble is coming. This one isn't just out on the water. It's in my home, in my family, and in the way my son-in-law looks at everything I've worked to preserve. I sip my coffee and glance out at the bay, the sun struggling through gray clouds. Money blows in fast, like a gust that rattles the shutters, but only stone and steel stand when the storm passes. I've built my life on that truth. I wonder if Grant has ever learned it. If you're still watching and feel the weight of this betrayal, please comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's step into chapter 2. Grant showed up one evening with a bottle of scotch tucked under his arm, the kind of brand that costs more than I ever thought reasonable. He greeted me like family, called me dad, with that slick grin he wears when he wants something. "You know I think of you as my own father," he said, pouring 2 glasses before I had the chance to decline. "Emily and the kids will always be taken care of. You don't have to worry about a thing." His words were honeyed, but they coated something sharp. I'd spent too many years reading storms in the sky not to recognize one forming at my kitchen table. He set down a thick stack of papers between us, the kind lawyers love and regular men dread. "Just some routine adjustments," he explained, sliding the pile toward me as though it were nothing more than a magazine. "It's about simplifying ownership, streamlining taxes, making sure everything is efficient. You don't need to bother with the details. It'll help protect the family assets." His tone carried the certainty of someone who assumed my signature was a given. As I leafed through the pages, the words blurred into legal jargon, but one phrase leapt out at me like a live wire: durable power of attorney. It sat there, buried between tax schedules and property forms, but I knew what it meant. That single document would hand Grant control over everything I owned, from my home to my bank account, even decisions about my health if it came to that. I pushed the papers back across the table. "I don't sign things I don't understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. Grant chuckled, a soft sound meant to dismiss me. "You're overthinking it, Tom. Folks your age worry too much. This is just the modern way to do things." But I wasn't laughing. My gut told me to trust the same instincts that kept me alive atop poles and winter gales. Something was wrong, and Grant was testing just how far he could push me. The next morning, I noticed the mailbox outside had a new lock. When I asked the locksmith working down the street, he shrugged. "Came in on an order from a Whitaker," he said. My stomach tightened. That afternoon, the bank called to confirm a request to change the mailing address on my statements. The clerk said the authorization had come in the form of a scanned DPOA. My heart hammered in my chest. I hadn't signed anything. Someone was forging my hand, pretending to be me, and using it to crawl inside my life. I went to Emily, hoping she'd see what I saw. She looked at me with tired eyes and said it was nothing to worry about. "It's just procedure, Dad. Grant wants to help manage the paperwork so you don't have to stress over it." Her words cut deeper than she realized. I could see she believed it, or wanted to believe it. She trusted her husband's charm over her father's warning. That hurt more than the changed locks. That night I couldn't sleep. From my bedroom, I heard the hum of engines near the boatyard. Stepping outside, I saw figures moving with flashlights, voices carrying over the water. They were drilling, measuring, placing survey stakes into soil I had walked since I was a boy. Not one of them looked my way, not one asked my permission. It was as if I no longer existed, as though my history and my rights had been erased with the stroke of a pen. Back inside, I pulled out the old oak chest. Inside lay the patent file for the storm clamp, the sketches Eben and I had worked on, and the yellowed folder marked Wetlands 1998. These weren't just mementos, they were weapons, truths written in ink and sealed by law. If Grant thought he could bulldoze me out of the picture, he hadn't counted on what I still held. I picked up the phone and called Nora Daly, a lawyer I trusted. "We need to meet tomorrow," I told her. My voice was calmer than I felt. "There's trouble coming." We agreed on standard baking at dawn, the kind of place where the smell of bread made hard conversations easier to swallow. On my kitchen table, the stack of Grant's papers lay beside the morning forecast. Another nor'easter brewing off the coast. 2 storms were forming, one on the horizon and one inside my own bloodline. I knew which one frightened me more. As I turned off the lights for the night, I thought of the poles I had strapped myself to, shaking in the wind, wires thrumming like angry violins. I had always trusted the strength of wood and steel when the storm hit. Now, I would have to trust my own spine. If you're still here and the tension has your heart racing, comment number 2 below to show me you're following every twist. Now, let's uncover Chapter 3. The morning felt like any other as I walked back toward my house from the corner store, a paper bag of groceries in hand. But when I reached the porch, my steps froze. The lock on my front door had been changed, the brass gleam too new, the keyhole unfamiliar. 2 black trash bags sat on the steps, bulging with what I immediately recognized as my belongings. My clothes crammed in haphazardly, a stack of framed photographs jutting from the plastic like broken bones. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned, the bag of groceries slipping from my hand and spilling oranges across the boards. Grant appeared on the threshold, shoulders squared, wearing the confidence of a man who thought the world had bent to his will. Emily hovered behind him, her eyes red and swollen. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Grant's voice was smooth, practiced. "Tom, it's time you moved somewhere more appropriate. This place is about to undergo major renovations. It's not safe for you anymore." I felt the words slice through me. This was my home, the place I'd built with my wife, the walls that carried every echo of our lives together. "This is my house," I said, but my voice was steadier than I expected. Grant smirked. "I just closed a $30 million deal. We're moving forward, Tom. This is what's best for everyone." He said it like he was bestowing a gift, not stealing a legacy. Emily flinched when I looked at her, but she said nothing. Her silence cut deeper than his arrogance. I asked on what authority he thought he could throw me out. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and flipped the screen toward me. There it was, a grainy scan of a quitclaim deed, with my name scribbled at the bottom, stapled to a durable power of attorney. "You signed these," he said, his tone smug. My stomach twisted. "I've never signed any of this," I replied. Grant waved a hand. "You must have forgotten. Electronic signatures are binding, Tom. Technology has moved on. You should be grateful I'm handling these details for you." Before I could answer, the flashing lights of a police cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. 2 officers stepped out. Grant must have called them because he immediately told them I was causing a disturbance. I tried to explain, to show them the absurdity of the situation, but they shook their heads. "This is a civil matter, sir," one officer said flatly. "You'll need to resolve it through the courts. For now, we need you to leave the property." I wanted to rage, to fight, but I knew it would do no good. My house was no longer a home. It was a battlefield I couldn't win today. With shaking hands, I bent and lifted the oak chest from beside the trash bags. Inside were the things that still mattered: the storm clamp patent file, the wetlands documents, fragments of my past and maybe my future defense. Everything else, my bed, my books, even the smell of Ellen in the curtains, was beyond my reach. I walked down the steps past the officers, the weight of the chest pressing into my arms and the weight of betrayal pressing into my chest. Behind me, I heard Emily's muffled sob, but she didn't call after me. Grant closed the door, and the sound of the lock turning was louder than any storm wind I'd ever faced. The Sunset Motor Inn welcomed me with peeling paint and a vacancy sign that flickered even in daylight. I rented a room that smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes. The wallpaper peeled in the corners, and the bed sagged in the middle. Sitting there, staring at the single lamp casting a yellow glow, I felt the humiliation settle in. In 3 hours, I had gone from homeowner to exile. But humiliation soon hardened into something else: anger, determination. I picked up the phone and called Nora Daly. My voice was low but steady as I laid out the facts. She listened carefully, then said the words I needed. "This is elder abuse, Tom. And those documents? Likely forgery. I'll file for an emergency injunction first thing in the morning." Before hanging up, she added something that made me sit up straighter. "Your Class B founder unit in Reed Boatyard still gives you veto power. And without your signature, half of that $30 million your son-in-law brags about is locked in escrow. He can't touch it." I set the phone down and looked at the oak chest. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of control return. Grant thought he had thrown me away like yesterday's trash, but the truth was still on my side. He had taken my house, but he hadn't taken the one thing he couldn't forge: my authority. I ran a hand over the grain of the chest, the wood worn smooth by years of use. Inside was more than paper. It was the last defense of my dignity. And as I listened to the wind rattle the motel window, I whispered to myself, "He thinks he's won, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." If you're still watching and these revelations shock you, drop a number 3 in the comments to let me know you're hooked. Now, let's move forward into Chapter 4. Nora Daly did not waste time. By dawn the next morning, she had already filed an emergency petition with the Cumberland County Court, demanding that every action taken under the forged power of attorney be suspended. She moved with the precision of a surgeon, knowing exactly where to cut and what to preserve. By the time we met in her office that afternoon, the banks had been notified. My accounts, statements, and addresses were locked against further tampering. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt a measure of stability return. Together we combed through the corporate records of Reed Boatyard, LLC, pulling files from the Bureau of Corporations. The paperwork was thick, but Nora's eyes were sharp. "Here," she said, pointing to a recent amendment. It was an attempt to strike the Class B founder unit, the very clause that gave me veto power, but my signature was nowhere on it. "Invalid," she concluded. "They tried to erase you, Tom, but they can't do it without your consent. Legally, you still hold the keys." That knowledge steadied me, but danger still lurked. That evening, I checked my old email account and found a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Take the offer." Inside was a blunt proposal, $200,000 wired to me if I agreed to leave town quietly and stop interfering with progress. It read like something typed by a lawyer and a thug at the same time. My first impulse was to delete it, but I saved the file instead and sent it on to Nora. "We'll forward this to the police," she told me. "It's evidence of coercion." I could almost hear Grant's arrogance in the background of that message, certain that every man has a price. Emily called later that night. Her voice was weary, frayed at the edges. "Dad, please let Grant handle this. He knows what he's doing. We'll make sure you're comfortable somewhere else." I closed my eyes and held the phone tight. "Emily, have you even read the operating agreement?" Silence. I could picture her chewing her lip, the way she did as a child when caught between truth and a lie. She didn't answer. That silence told me more than words could. She was still choosing him over me, even if she didn't know the whole story. After hanging up, I opened the oak chest once again. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the room. I spread the wetlands documents across the motel desk. In bold type, the survey from 1998 declared the marshland behind the boatyard a protected zone. Any redevelopment would require mitigation, permits, and years of hearings. This was more than a relic. It was leverage. Grant could charm bankers and investors, but he couldn't charm the Department of Environmental Protection. The more I pieced it together, the clearer it became. This was never just about my house. Grant wanted control over the boatyard and the deals tied to it. His $30 million boast wasn't free and clear. It depended on assets he thought he had stolen from me. Without my consent, the foundation of his empire was sand. The next morning, a courier envelope arrived at Nora's office from a technical partner involved in Grant's project. Inside was a letter requesting immediate confirmation of the patent transfer for the storm clamp device. To finalize the release of funds, they needed the original notarized signature of Thomas Reed, the only living inventor. Grant, it turned out, had submitted only a photocopy, lacking the necessary legal weight. Without my pen on that document, his grand transaction could not close. When Nora read the letter aloud, a slow, almost incredulous smile crossed her face. "Tom, do you understand what this means?" I did. The storm clamp, a simple invention born from nights of frostbite and exhaustion, had become my strongest shield. Grant had overlooked the fact that the old man he dismissed still held the authority to decide whether his fortune materialized at all. I sat back, feeling the strength of the moment sink in. For days, I had been treated like a burden, shoved aside as if my life's work meant nothing. Yet, here it was, proof that his empire rested on my name, my signature, my history. He had underestimated me. The motel room was still small, the wallpaper still peeling, but for the first time it felt less like exile and more like a command post. I looked at the chest, at the patents and the wetlands survey, and thought, he believes he's thrown me into the storm, but he doesn't know I am the storm. If you're still here and can sense the storm building, type number 4 in the comments so I know you're walking this path with me. Now, let's head into Chapter 5. The Harbor Crown launch looked like a coronation. Chandeliers glittered above rows of suited investors, city officials, and reporters in the ballroom of Portland's most expensive hotel. Screens glowed with renderings of glass towers rising over the waterfront, apartments priced high enough to make old dock workers choke. Grant Whitaker stood center stage, his voice booming with confidence. "This is the future of Portland," he declared, clicking to another slide of golden condos and rooftop pools. "Every legal matter is resolved, every signature secured, 30 million already committed. We are greenlit and moving forward." The crowd clapped politely, some whistling. Emily sat in the front row, her smile frozen, eyes darting as though she wasn't sure she belonged there. I waited until the moment Grant held out the contract, ready for cameras to capture him cementing his triumph. Then I rose with Nora Daly at my side and walked down the center aisle. Conversations hushed, heads turned, and the sound of my cane striking the marble echoed like a gavel. Grant's face flickered, shock first, then forced charm. "Tom," he said into the microphone, "good to see you here to celebrate our family's future." Nora didn't waste breath. She strode to the stage and handed a clerk a stamped order from the Cumberland County Court. "Effective immediately," she announced. "All transactions based on a forged power of attorney are suspended." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. I pulled the operating agreement from my chest pocket and held it up. "My veto rights remain intact," I said, my voice steady. "No sale, no development, no payout proceeds without my signature." A murmur spread. Investors leaning toward one another, calculating losses. Then came the twist no one expected. A reporter in the back stood and read from his phone. "Mr. Whitaker, can you comment on this email offering $200,000 for Thomas Reed to walk away?" The message flashed on the projection screen. My name, the bribe, the threat of silence. The room erupted. Cameras swiveled. Reporters shouted questions. Grant's mouth opened, closed. Then he stammered about miscommunication and overzealous partners. I looked straight at Emily. My daughter watched her husband throw me out of my own house. She stayed silent while he forged my name. Her face crumpled. Tears streaked her cheeks as she covered her mouth, the cameras catching every second. From the side of the room, a representative from the state's Department of Environmental Protection stood. "For the record," she said firmly, "the Harbor Crown site includes wetlands under federal and state protection. No permit has been issued. Any work is unlawful until full review." That announcement struck harder than any punch. Investors began shuffling papers, some already heading for the exit. Grant slammed the podium. "Don't you see? He's nothing but an old man standing in the way of progress. I've secured the future, and he clings to the past." His voice cracked, rage overtaking polish. Flashes from cameras lit his contorted face as his words sealed the picture of arrogance. I waited until the silence hung heavy, Then I withdrew a letter and held it high. From StratTech Engineering, the partner funding your project, I explained. They require my original signature on the storm clamp patent to finalize their investment. Without it, your $30 million stays locked in escrow. Without me, you have nothing. The ballroom froze. Investors turned on him instantly, whispering, dialing phones, snapping briefcases shut. Emily sat slumped in her chair, mascara smearing down her cheeks. Grant's skin turned a pale shade I'd only seen on men who realized their power had evaporated. Nora leaned into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Harbor Crown is not moving forward today. Thank you for your attention. I stepped off the stage, cane striking the floor with deliberate rhythm, flashes bursting like fireworks as photographers captured the moment. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the outcast or the burden. I was the man holding the final card, and the world had just seen it played. The morning after the disastrous Harbor Crown presentation, every paper in Portland carried my picture. Some showed me gripping the cane, others holding up the operating agreement, but all of them painted the same story. The old man who stood in the way of a $30 million dream. For me, it was never about money. For Grant, it was everything. Reporters camped outside his office, investors stormed his phone lines, and city officials distanced themselves from the project like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Emily, caught between us, became collateral damage. Friends whispered, colleagues judged, and her children overheard more than she realized. By noon, Grant's lawyers had fired the first shot. A thick envelope arrived at Nora's office accusing me of tortious interference and threatening a countersuit for damages. Nora read it once, then tossed it aside. Bluff, she said, but her jaw tightened. He's trying to scare you into surrender. That same day, a pair of investors called me directly, offering a tidy sum if I agreed to sell my veto rights quietly. You'd be securing your family's future, one of them urged. The figure was tempting, far more than I'd ever earned in a lifetime of climbing poles and repairing lines. For the first time, I understood how easy it would be to trade principle for peace. Then Emily came. She knocked at the motel door, hair unkempt, eyes swollen. She sat on the sagging bedspread and burst into tears. Dad, please. Grant's lost everything. I don't know how to hold the family together. If you just sign, even a partial agreement, we can salvage something. Think about the kids. They don't deserve this mess. Her words tore at me more than any legal threat. She was still my daughter, still the baby Ellen had placed in my arms the night she was born. To see her begging now felt like being stabbed with my own love. But there was something else. That evening, as I returned from the diner with a paper cup of soup, I found a plain envelope slid under the motel door. Inside was a single photograph. Me walking down Commercial Street, head bent, cane tapping the sidewalk. Scrawled in thick marker beneath the image were the words, "Stop or you'll regret it." My blood went cold. This was no longer just signatures and filings. Someone wanted to frighten me into silence, maybe worse. I brought the note straight to Nora. She studied it carefully. This is intimidation, Tom. Another piece of the puzzle. If you fold now, you reward them. If you fight, we can add this to the evidence of abuse and fraud. She leaned closer. But the choice has to be yours. Litigation will be ugly. They'll drag you through months of depositions, hearings, headlines. If you hold firm, you may lose your daughter for good. Are you prepared for that? Her words hit me like a winter gust. I thought of Ellen. She used to watch me strap on the climbing belt and shake her head, saying, "One day that storm will take you." But I always told her the same thing. Storms only knock down poles that rot from the inside. Strength isn't about avoiding the wind. It's about standing straight when it comes. I heard her voice that night as clearly as if she were still alive. Don't ever let anyone diminish what you've built. I sat in the motel chair staring at the patent papers, the wetlands survey, and the court order spread across the table. On one side was family peace bought with compromise. On the other was justice carried at the cost of more pain. My heart ached for Emily, for the grandchildren who would remember only that Grandpa and Dad fought until the family split apart. But another part of me, the part forged in ice storms and long nights on power lines, knew that surrender would mean erasing everything Ellen and I had stood for. When the thunder cracked over Casco Bay and the rain started to lash against the motel window, the decision crystallized. I would not bend. I would not sign. My legacy, my dignity, and the truth itself demanded more than retreat. I whispered into the storm, not sure if I was talking to Ellen, to God, or to myself. The pole doesn't fall if it's planted deep. Neither will I. If you're still watching and can feel the weight of this impossible choice, comment number 6 below to let me know you're right here with me. Now, let's see what happens in Chapter 7. The days following the Harbor Crown debacle felt like standing in the middle of a gale with no shelter. Every newspaper ran the story, some painting me as the stubborn old man blocking progress, others calling me the courageous father who refused to bow to greed. Television anchors debated my motives, and strangers on social media tore me apart or praised me with equal fervor. For a man who once lived quietly by the bay, fixing nets and repainting shutters, the sudden spotlight was blinding. Privacy evaporated overnight. Wherever I went, I felt eyes following me, whispers brushing the back of my neck. Grant's fall was swifter than even I expected. Investors who once applauded him now slammed doors in his face. The $30 million deal, trumpeted like a crown jewel, was frozen indefinitely. Banks declined his requests for bridge loans, citing uncertainty of ownership and pending litigation. His phone, once buzzing with opportunity, now rang only with creditors and furious partners. The golden boy of Portland finance had become its cautionary tale. Emily bore the brunt of the collapse. Friends distanced themselves, colleagues whispered about her husband's arrogance, and invitations vanished. She told me people treated her like a pariah at her own children's school. She called late one night, her voice ragged. "Dad, everything's falling apart. We can't even go to the grocery store without someone pointing. Why did you have to make this so public?" I wanted to remind her that I hadn't forged documents, hadn't bribed or lied, but her pain cut me too deep to argue. The silence between us was heavier than any storm cloud. For me, the consequences came differently. Anonymous letters slid under motel doors, some urging me to stand strong, others warning me to shut up or else. Once, leaving the diner, I noticed a black sedan idling too long at the corner, headlights off. The driver pulled away when I turned, cane in hand, pretending I wasn't trembling. Nora insisted I move to a safer place, arranging a temporary apartment through a client who owed her a favor. I packed my oak chest and left the motel behind, though its mildew stink seemed to follow me. The real blow came in Nora's office. She closed the blinds before speaking, her tone grave. "Tom, I need you to hear this clearly. Early investigation shows Grant partnered with a private equity fund operating out of Delaware with foreign backers. On paper, it's legitimate. Off paper, it looks like a laundering conduit. If that's true, this isn't just civil fraud. This could become a federal criminal case." My chest tightened. "You're saying Grant is tangled up with criminals?" Nora nodded, possibly without realizing the full extent. But money this large doesn't move without shadows. If the feds dig, they won't just stop with him. They'll want every scrap of evidence, including your testimony. I sat there stunned. I had thought this was a family betrayal, a legal battle over inheritance and respect. Now it looked like something darker, a web reaching far beyond our household quarrel. Suddenly, the threatening notes, the car outside the diner, they no longer felt like paranoia. They were the tremors of something real, something dangerous. Still, my heart ached more for Emily than for myself. She came to see me once more, her face pale, hands trembling. "Dad, you've already won. The deal's dead. Grant's ruined. Why keep going? You're tearing us apart. Are you happy now?" Her voice cracked, and I could see the little girl in her again, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees. I swallowed hard, because the truth was simple. No victory felt worth losing her. But love doesn't erase truth. I told her softly, "Emily, it was never about winning. It was about not letting lies define our family. One day you'll see that." She turned away, tears streaking her cheeks, and left without another word. The sound of the door closing behind her felt like the final break. That night, the rain returned, pounding Portland's streets, rattling windows like fists demanding entry. I stood by the apartment window, the city lights blurred by streaks of water. I thought of Ellen again, how she used to watch storms with me, her hand tucked in mine, whispering that every gale passes eventually. But this storm, the one raging through blood and business, showed no sign of clearing. Storms outside end in days, the storms inside us. Sometimes they last a lifetime. Nora worked fast. Within days, she had arranged a meeting with the FBI, ushering me into a sterile office where walls were lined with case files and the hum of fluorescent lights reminded me of hospital corridors. I carried the oak chest with me like a shield. Inside it were the forged documents Grant had tried to pass off, the email offering $200,000 for my silence. The photograph slid under my door with its crude warning. Nora laid everything neatly on the table, her voice calm but cutting as she explained the timeline. The agents listened intently, scribbling notes, their questions sharp and precise. One of them, Agent Howard, leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, we believe this goes beyond elder abuse. The fund your son-in-law partnered with has been flagged before for international laundering. With your cooperation, we can pursue this as a federal case." His tone was firm, professional, but I caught the undercurrent. This was no longer just about my family. It was about crime woven into financial systems much larger than us. The FBI insisted on measures for my safety. I was relocated to a small apartment arranged by Nora, equipped with cameras and locks that clicked shut like prison bars. It felt strange, a mix of relief and confinement, to know I was under protection. Nights were still uneasy. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a threat, every knock like the echo of that warning note. But for the first time since being forced out of my house, I felt guarded rather than abandoned. Then something unexpected happened. A man named Robert Klein, a heavyweight investor once tied to Harbor Crown, asked to meet. We sat in a cafe overlooking the harbor, the kind of place where old men play chess on weekends. He confessed that Grant had misled him, painting the project as clean when, in fact, Klein suspected foul play from the start. "I've lost money," he admitted, "but not nearly what others could have. If you expose him, Tom, you won't just be saving yourself. You'll be saving the rest of us from throwing more into the fire." For the first time, an ally appeared where I expected only enemies. And then came the shock from Emily. One evening, a courier left an envelope at Nora's office marked with her handwriting. Inside were emails, Grant's correspondence with the shadowy fund. The words leapt from the page like sparks. Plans to mortgage the boatyard, schemes to pledge the storm clamp patent without my signature, all in exchange for quick injections of cash. He hadn't simply tried to take what was mine. He had been willing to sell the family's legacy to criminals who cared nothing for us or our town. When I read those pages, my chest tightened. Part of me grieved that Emily had known enough to dig them up, yet still hadn't spoken to me face to face. But another part of me, the part that feared she was lost entirely to her husband's world, felt a small flicker of relief. Maybe she was beginning to see Grant for who he truly was. The truth cut both ways. Pain, because my daughter had married into deceit so deep it threatened to swallow her whole. Relief, because she had chosen to slip me the truth rather than bury it. Nora's eyes narrowed as she scanned the emails. "This is gold," she said. "Proof that he planned to defraud not only you but his own investors. It ties directly into the laundering probe. With this, the feds will have no choice but to act." We spent the following days building a strategy. Nora rehearsed my testimony, drilling me on dates, signatures, and the sequence of betrayals. "Stay calm," she advised. "He'll try to rattle you. Don't let him." She arranged to submit the evidence both to the court handling the civil injunction and to the FBI, ensuring the case could not be swept quietly under a rug. I felt like a soldier preparing for battle, except my weapons were manila folders and sworn affidavits. Still, the nights remained heavy. Alone in the apartment, I'd catch myself staring at Ellen's photograph, remembering her words about storms and poles standing strong. I knew now that this was no longer about saving a house or even punishing Grant. It was about cutting through the rot before it poisoned more lives, including Emily's and my grandchildren's. One evening, I walked down to the pier, the air sharp with salt and wind. The bay churned under a restless sky, gulls circling above like impatient sentries. I leaned on my cane and whispered into the gust. This isn't about keeping what's mine, it's about keeping what's right. For the first time in months, the horizon didn't look like a wall, it looked like a path. If you're still here and can sense that the truth is finally breaking through, type number 8 in the comments, so I know you're still standing with me. Now, let's continue into Chapter 9. The courthouse smelled of old wood and polished brass, a place where lives were measured in testimony and judgment. I walked in beside Nora, the oak chest clutched against me like an anchor. Every seat was filled, investors hungry for blood, reporters with pens poised, and scattered neighbors who had once waved to me on quiet mornings in Portland. At the front sat Grant, tailored suit stiff against a body that twitched with barely disguised fury. Emily was behind him, her hands clasped, face pale, eyes darting between us as though torn in half. The judge called order, and the proceedings began. Grant's attorney rose first, spouting a tale of misunderstanding, of a father-in-law confused by grief and paperwork. But the story unraveled when Nora stood and began presenting our evidence piece by piece. She laid out the forged documents, the so-called power of attorney with its shaky imitation of my signature. She read aloud the email promising $200,000 if I would disappear. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Then came the photographs. Nora held them up one by one, my belongings dumped in trash bags, the threatening note slid under my motel door, the correspondence Emily had slipped to us in secret. Each was entered into the record, each a nail in Grant's defense. The judge's brow furrowed, but the final blow came from the government itself. An FBI agent rose, announcing that their investigation had already uncovered ties between Grant's financial partners and offshore accounts long suspected of laundering. Mr. Whitaker, the agent declared, is now a subject of an ongoing federal case. Gasps erupted. Grant shifted in his chair, sweat gathering at his temples. At one point he turned, eyes locked on me, voice sharp enough to carry across the room. You ruined everything. You couldn't just let it go, could you? I met his gaze without flinching. I didn't ruin anything. You did when you forged my name. The silence that followed was heavier than the judge's gavel. And then Emily stood. Her legs trembled, but her voice, though soft, carried. I can't defend him anymore, she said. She handed the clerk a folder of additional emails, proof Grant had hidden dealings from her, too, planning to mortgage the boatyard and patent without my knowledge. Her tears glistened, but her words cut deeper than any lawyer's. He betrayed all of us. The judge recessed briefly, then returned with a ruling that felt both inevitable and surreal. My ownership was confirmed. The house, the patent, the founders unit in the Boatyard LLC. Everything Grant had boasted of controlling was mine by right. Grant's documents were declared fraudulent, his transactions void. And then the gavel fell on him directly. Grant Whitaker is remanded into custody pending federal prosecution. Two marshals rose, guiding him from the table, as his jaw tightened, rage burning, but impotent. The cameras waited outside, flashing like fireworks as Nora and I stepped into the brisk Portland air. People shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. I said nothing. Victory had come, but it tasted bittersweet. I caught sight of Emily at the curb, holding her youngest child close. She didn't approach, didn't speak, only gave me a look filled with both gratitude and grief. That wound cut deeper than Grant's betrayal. Later that evening, alone in the small apartment that still smelled faintly of paint and dust, I stacked the case files on the table. Each bore a red sticker stamped evidence. I stared at them for a long while, then turned to the window. The sunset bled across Casco Bay, crimson fading to violet. The city lights flickered on one by one. I whispered to the empty room, to Ellen, to myself, I've saved the truth, but saving the family may be beyond me. The words lingered as the last light faded, leaving me with the quiet knowledge that justice had been won, but at a cost no court could measure. In the weeks after the verdict, Portland seemed to move on, but my world still carried the weight of everything that had happened. Grant remained in federal custody, His name splashed across headlines for crimes far larger than the forgery that began this spiral. The investors who once raised glasses to him now spat his name like poison. Emily kept to herself, raising her children quietly. The distance between us remained wide, though a thin thread of hope tugged at the silence. I returned to my old house with mixed feelings. The structure was the same, but it no longer felt like the battleground it had been. For the first time in decades, I decorated rooms according to my own taste. I painted the study in warm colors, turned the spare bedroom into a workshop for small projects, and allowed myself a corner for painting, a hobby Ellen had once encouraged, but I had never made time for. It was strange, after all the shouting and legal wrangling, to find peace in the smell of sawdust and turpentine. Neighbors stopped by, some out of curiosity, others with casseroles and awkward pats on the back. They spoke of me as though I had done something heroic, calling me the man who stood against greed, or the father who wouldn't be erased. Yet I never felt like a hero. Heroes save without losing. I had saved my dignity, my legacy, but I had lost the closeness of my only daughter. No medal could mend that wound. Still, life asked to be lived. I took long walks along the waterfront, cane tapping against the planks of the pier. The gulls called, the waves slapped against the pilings, and the city seemed less menacing under the open sky. I was invited to speak at a local forum on elder rights, to share my experience with others who feared their families might strip them of power in old age. Standing at a lectern, looking at a room full of gray hair and wary eyes, I said what I wished someone had told me sooner. You are not a burden. You are the roots. Without roots, trees fall. The applause was gentle but sincere. In quiet hours, I wrote in a journal. The words came slowly, scratched out in uneven lines, but they carried truths I wanted to preserve. Sometimes to keep what's right, you must let go of what you love. Blood is not the measure of family. Respect is. Protection is. Writing those words did not dull the ache of Emily's absence, but it gave the pain shape, something I could set on the page rather than carry alone. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar. My hands shook as I unfolded it. Just a few lines. Dad, you were right. I need time, but I want the kids to know the truth. Emily. Tears stung my eyes. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a spark in the ashes, proof that love wasn't entirely dead. I placed the letter in the oak chest, the same chest that had held my patents and surveys, my armor through the storm. Now it held something gentler, a reminder that even in betrayal, the possibility of return remained. One morning, before dawn, I walked to the pier. The air was crisp, the horizon painted with streaks of pink and gold. I stood at the edge, watching the sun rise over Casco Bay, its light breaking through the mist. For months, I had been defined by conflict, but in that moment, I felt something else: renewal. I whispered into the morning, revenge isn't taking from another man. The truest revenge is becoming everything they swore you could never be. The tide surged, the light spread, and I turned back toward the city with the quiet certainty that my story wasn't ending. It was only beginning again, shaped not by betrayal, but by the strength to endure it. Life has a way of testing the foundations we believe are unshakable. For years, we live under the illusion that family, trust, and loyalty are constants, permanent fixtures that cannot erode. Yet time and circumstance reveal something more complicated. Blood alone does not guarantee love. Familiarity does not guarantee respect. And age does not guarantee protection. The storm that strips away comfort also strips away illusions, forcing us to see clearly what remains when all false promises are gone. There comes a moment when the struggle is not about wealth, property, or even survival, but about dignity. Dignity is not something another person grants. It is the quiet, unwavering voice inside that insists we matter. When betrayal strikes hardest, when those we expect to shield us instead wound us, the instinct is often to retreat, to surrender. But the deeper truth is that surrender corrodes the soul more than loss ever could. To stand firm, even at great cost, is to declare that one's life has meaning beyond what others assign to it. The journey through conflict often reveals paradoxes. Victory may bring justice, but it can also leave scars that no courtroom ruling can heal. Sometimes doing what is right means losing what is dear. Sometimes preserving the truth requires sacrificing peace. These are the hard bargains of life, and no one escapes them untouched. Yet within these contradictions lies a profound lesson. The worth of a life is not measured by comfort, but by courage. Courage, in its truest form, is not loud or dramatic. It is often quiet, almost invisible to the world outside. It is the elderly hand signing one more affidavit instead of yielding. It is the decision to face humiliation rather than live in silence. It is the calm choice to tell the truth, even when lies would be easier. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that fear will not be the last word. There is also the matter of legacy. Too often, legacy is confused with inheritance, with money or property passed down like tokens. But true legacy is the values embedded in action, the invisible roots that hold future generations upright. When people choose integrity over convenience, justice over compromise, they leave behind more than titles or deeds. They leave a story that teaches, stand tall even when the wind howls, remain steady even when storms rage. In the modern world, betrayal does not always arrive in obvious disguises. Sometimes it wears the face of ambition, the language of progress, the promise of security. Yet, ambition without conscience rots quickly. Progress built on exploitation collapses. Security that depends on deception dissolves. Betrayal is not only the act of taking what is not yours, it is the deeper wound of treating people as obstacles rather than as human beings with dignity. And yet, even in betrayal, seeds of renewal exist. The collapse of illusions makes space for clarity. The loss of what seemed permanent creates room for what is true. Though the heart aches with absence, the soul learns resilience. In learning who cannot be trusted, we also discover who we truly are. In losing the comfort of false belonging, we find the strength to belong to ourselves. There is no denying that such lessons are painful. They scrape against memory, bruise the spirit, and sometimes fracture bonds that never fully mend. But pain is not the end of the story. Pain can also be a teacher. It instructs us to build stronger foundations, to plant our roots deeper, to measure relationships not by words spoken, but by respect shown. Through pain, we are reminded that storms come and go, but the choice to stand tall remains ours. In the end, what matters is not the fortune one holds, nor the house one inhabits, nor the titles written on paper. What matters is the unshakable decision to honor truth when it is challenged, to guard dignity when it is threatened, and to continue walking forward even when the path is lonely. This is the essence of justice, not revenge against another, but fidelity to oneself. So, when the next storm rises, when betrayal or loss threatens to uproot everything, remember this: strength is not found in avoiding the gale, but in standing firm within it. To endure is to triumph. To live with dignity is to win the only victory that cannot be taken away. And to choose integrity, even at great personal cost, is to leave behind a legacy stronger than wealth, louder than scandal, and more enduring than betrayal. The storm always passes. The lesson remains. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.